Hello everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. Otherwise, please interrupt me. My name is Sue Ellen Taalman. I'm working at Ghent University. We have some technical problems with our chairman, which is Tom Kleijs from the company of Ivago. So I'm taking over the introduction to this session. This parallel session is named Sustainability Assessment of Eco-Innovative Strategies. I do hope you can see my screen. The key goal of this session basically is that we aim for the assessment of the sustainability of waste management systems, as this is key in decision making, and we want to improve, of course, the use of waste as a resource. So therefore, this session will focus on the assessment of current waste management systems and innovative initiatives. And in total, we have analyzed for 6 European cities the waste management scheme of today, but also of some eco-innovative solutions and strategies. So I want to introduce you the program of this parallel session. So the first half hour, I will present and moderate a part which is dealt with the sustainability assessment framework development. So I will go in detail there. What is the framework? How did we build it? What was the approach, etc. And there is, of course, plenty of time foreseen to have a discussion there as well. From 2:30 to 3:15, I will give the word to Davide Tonini from GRC European Commission. He will moderate and present the application of the framework towards the cities and provide some highlights of sustainability results. Also there you will have the opportunity to have a discussion, to interact during the discussion. And then a last part in this session is foreseen for decision support to policy implementation as also a discussion part. It will be moderated by Bob Heldermans from Delft University, and we have 2 invited key speakers there. We have first Laurie Hamelin, who's a senior researcher at INSA Toulouse. She's also quite famous in Make Our Planet Great Again. We have also Evelien Jonkhoff. She was there already in the morning session with the keynote speaker. She's strategic advisor on sustainability and circular economy of the city of Amsterdam. And also there we foresee an interactive moment and discussion. And then I do hope that Tom will be will join us to have a final conclusion and goodbye. I have some hello Tom, I can hear you. We have some practical agreements that we want to make, to make it efficient, this parallel session. So during the presentation, may I ask you all to mute your microphone, to switch off your camera, and if you have questions, and I hope you do, please ask the questions in the chat box. So do not wait until the presentation is over, but take the opportunity during the presentation already to ask your questions in the chat box. So the idea is that the moderators and the team of REPAiR try to answer your questions. In case you feel that your question has not been answered completely, you may use the hand symbol to clarify any further your question or comment raised. And the session will be recorded, as this it would be easier for us then afterwards to make some minutes. So that's it for the practical agreements, and I now switch to the first part of the session, which is about the sustainability framework development. So I hope I can share my screen again. We have some problems. Okay. I hope you can see my screen. So I want to give you a bit of details on how we developed a comprehensive framework, which is analyzing or should analyze the sustainability as a whole for waste management systems. What was our approach and what was the final result? So a short introduction. Well, basically, if you want to assess the sustainability of waste management systems, it requires a thorough understanding of the processes involved. And we need to try to comprehensively address the three pillars, so society, environment, and economy. A sustainability framework basically must include a set of impact categories. And impact categories can be, for example, eutrophication, the well-known ones, global warming, etc. They are each described by one or more indicators, and they belong to different areas of protection, as we call it, or areas of concern. A very famous one is human health. And those areas of protection may be further grouped into the three pillars. What is very important is the quantification of both local, regional, and global effects while analyzing waste management systems. So to look at spatial differentiation is really important while developing such a framework. And on top, I think also key is stakeholder involvement. Key is to involve stakeholders, especially at the phase of selecting the impact categories. And why are we now developing such a framework? Basically, the main goal is that we want to improve the social, economic, and environmental performance of cities. So, in a nutshell, the goal was to develop this very comprehensive sustainability assessment framework for waste management systems in European cities. We focused mainly on organic waste streams because all the cities in REPAiR thought that this was a key stream to investigate with a lot of potential. And we also focused on the inclusion of local social impacts. The involvement of stakeholders and experts from different disciplines during the development was also key, and we aimed for a transparent approach. So how did we come to the final framework? We also aimed to have a real operational framework and not only a conceptual one, a framework that could be applied to real case studies. So a starting point for developing the operational sustainability framework is the inclusion of different types of impacts. We have multidisciplinary, multi-scale, and multi-size impacts. Multidisciplinary refer to the three pillars, so economic, environmental, and social. Multi-scale and multi-size impacts, they tell something differently. They look at spatial differentiation. So multi-scale, it looks at the different processes that are connected to waste treatment. For example, you can have collection in a city, but then the treatment is more at the national level or even abroad. So the difference in location, so the geographical spread of processes, that's the multi-scale effect. You also have a multi-size effect. For example, looking again at collection, you have there waste collection trucks. They run on diesel. So basically, they have a lot of emissions while driving around. This can cause very global effects like global warming, but they also can cause very local effects. I'm thinking about noise or traffic jams, etc. So that's the multi-size effect. The idea, of course, if we want to come to a framework, is that we can select impact categories. And we have applied different approaches for the identification and selection. On the one hand, for multidisciplinary impacts, and on the other hand for multi-scale and multi-size impacts. Let's start with multi-size and multi-scale impacts. How did we approach that? First of all, we tried to analyze what is now the system under study, and we also followed a life cycle thinking approach. So I don't know if you can see my mouse, but if you follow a life cycle thinking approach, you have a foreground system, which is the main system under study, and a background system, which are the supply chain processes that support your foreground system. We have then split the foreground system into two parts. Part one are all the processes that are located in a focus area, but this is defined in the project. That can be one municipality or two neighboring municipalities or something else. So that's defined by stakeholders. The collection processes are definitely there, but there can also be treatment processes in the focus area. And also the regional level processes are in part one. Everything that is outside the region, all those processes are captured in part two. Then you can see in the orange rectangle below, you have there the supply chain. So again, if you have your waste collection truck running on diesel, this diesel, it should be produced somewhere else, also consuming resources and emitting emissions. So that's basically all captured in the supply chain processes. Luckily, what is coming out of a waste management system nowadays are recovered resources. We can have bioenergy coming out of treatment of biowaste. And this means we also have avoided products. So it means we shouldn't produce any fossil-based electricity or energy. So that's also a very important aspect to take into account into the system under study. And sometimes in REPAiR, we had the opportunity to look a bit upstream of waste generation. So in terms of prevention, we had some solutions that we looked at, and this was also important, of course. Once we had the data and the opportunity, we also looked at that aspect. So, going back to multi-size and multi-scale. Multi-scale impacts were accounted for because of the processes that were geographically spread. So we took that into account in our inventory. And micro impacts were accounted for specifically for those processes that were located in the focus area and regional level. And that for all processes, basically, in the whole system, we analyzed meso and macro effects, so the more global impacts, based on the life cycle thinking approach. Now I'm looking at multidisciplinary impacts. So if you remember well, those were the social, economic, and environmental classifications. How did we do that? How did we came to a kind of selection? We started with a preliminary set of 48 impact categories. And we identified those 48 categories from literature, from other projects that were just finished, like ProSuite FP7, but also we had a very broad consortium in the sense that they had a lot of expertise from different disciplines. They also came with very interesting impact categories. So we had a set of 48 impact categories, which we then presented to 54 stakeholders. And this was a very nice sample covering different cities and sectors. The idea was that these stakeholders would rate the impact categories on their perceived relevance between 1 and 4. If they think this impact category is very relevant, they gave a 4 as a score. Now, to give you a transparent approach on how we proceeded, the results from the scoring exercise were then used to rank all the impact categories per area of protection. So we had 5 areas of protection in the project. The impact categories that scored less than 65% on that perceived relevance scale were not retained. And then we also made sure that we had a kind of nice balance amongst all the areas of protection. So there was a limitation of maximum 10 categories per area of protection. A final step was that we provided the preliminary selection of impact categories to an expert panel debate, and also non-consortium members were invited to discuss some aspects, and then we came up with this final selection of impact categories. So we have 28 impact categories and indicators in the end. So in yellow, you can find the economic ones. You can see there capital expenditure, operational expenditures, end-of-life expenditure revenues. In green, you can see the more ecological ones: eutrophication, ecotoxicity, land use, fossil depletion. Also, global warming and water use are connected to the ecological pillar. And then in the red, it's more the social pillar that is shown. And there, I think, very innovative and key are the micro impacts. So you can see on the left side of the red bar that we have 10, I would say 10 local effects that we try to analyze. I'm just picking out a few. We have odor impacts, private space consumption, total employment, etc. There are also more global impact categories like human toxicity, ozone depletion, etc. So this is actually the final selection of impact categories we aimed for. Okay, so we had now the impact categories which were selected, but it doesn't automatically mean we had also the indicator behind it. So we followed basically 3 different approaches to come up with the best indicator per impact category. Looking into the areas of protection, human health, ecosystem health, and natural resources, we were quite lucky that there are a lot of guidelines and standards which we could follow to select the best indicator. For the area of protection, well, we had to dig into a lot of literature, and also data availability was key to, in the end, select the best indicator. For human well-being, also there, it was quite challenging. And there we had these local social impacts, and we had to dig very much into literature. There was not so much known about this. And so we also came up with some criteria to see if the indicator is really relevant. We had 4 criteria, which was, the first one was feasibility. Can we really implement the indicator and use it? How practical is it? Another one was relevancy. How relevant basically is the indicator to assess what we want to assess? Easiness to interpret was also a key criteria, because policymakers and other stakeholders should be able to interpret it quite easily. And achievability was the last one. How much time and effort does it take basically to implement the indicator? Okay, I'm going now from impact categories and indicators towards areas of protection. So we have at the midpoint level, we had there these 28 results of indicators, but very, very important is also that we try to aggregate results, and we try to do that at the level of areas of protection. We chose to go for a strong sustainability approach. It means we did not allow any compensation. So if you would score very good in human health and very bad in prosperity, it does not compensate. So that's something we aim for, to go for strong sustainability. We did, of course, again, a full literature review about all sorts of aggregation techniques, normalization and weighting sets in general. And we found basically for a significant number of indicators that we have selected in our framework that there was no normalization and weighting set available. So we propose to have a kind of, or develop a kind of ad hoc aggregation approach. We based ourselves on multi-criteria decision analysis, where we allowed a relative ranking of scenarios per area of protection. So that was really nice. For example, if you look at human health, you can then see if the status quo would perform better or worse than some of the eco-innovative scenarios. That is actually what came out of this aggregation approach. To give you the details, we used the outranking electorate 2 method with min-max normalization, and we used weighting scores of the survey that we did within the project. Basically, this is the final framework, how it looks like, bringing together all aspects. So you have the inventory layer on top with the system and the study and all the processes that should be covered. You have the midpoint layer with all the impact categories and indicators behind it. And then you have an aggregation layer towards the areas of protection. In case you want or need more information, there is a scientific article published. It's open access, so it should be available for everyone. There's also a deliverable on the website, which is called 4.4 Definitive Framework for Sustainability Assessment, and also there you find a lot of details. So, thanks a lot. I don't know if there is in the chats already some questions.
No questions, Sue, as far as I can see.
Okay. Let's then trigger a bit of discussion. I have prepared a slide in Mentimeter. Maybe some of you are familiar with Mentimeter. Let me put the link in the chat. Allow me. Voila. And I hope that everyone that is now participating in this session can just fill in the statements. It's only 8 statements. So I would like to see what's your opinion now. There are, maybe I can show you the screen again. Yeah, you are still seeing my screen probably. There are 8 statements. The first one is stakeholders were consulted to a large extent during the development. Do you agree? Do you not agree? The involvement of stakeholders is positive. Do you think that's true or not? The approach of selecting impact categories and indicators is transparent and clear. If you don't agree, also please go forward with that and explain why you don't agree. The impact categories and indicators selected cover the main concerns regarding sustainability analysis of waste management systems. Another one, there is a good balance in the analysis of local and global impacts. The Electorate 2 method as aggregation technique is a good choice. Aggregation at the level of areas of protection is sufficient, no need for a single score. And the last statement, the sustainability assessment framework developed is innovative and fills a gap in literature. So I'm trying to switch now. Okay. Okay, people are now filling in the Mentimeter tool. I see. I can try to share again the screen. Seven people already, 8 people. 9 people. Very nice. I see the bars going to the right with strongly agree, so that's nice to see. Okay, maybe just 1 more minute. Okay, I think we stick to 12 people that filled in the Mentimeter tool. Okay, 13 people. What I can see is that most of you agreed with the statement that it was a very transparent and clear approach of selecting the impact categories and indicators. That's really nice. If somebody wants to comment on that, feel free. Otherwise, I also see that there are few statements that people scored less in, so some people also scored disagree. And I see there's probably 1 or 2 persons that were not very much agreeing with the statement that the electric 2 method is a very good choice. Are there persons in the chat or in the session that want to clarify why they would not go for that method as aggregation technique? No.
Everyone agrees with Sue.
It seems they agree. We are also a bit maybe out of time already. I don't know.
Okay.
Some we may switch. I don't know.
Yes, I suggest, thank you, Sue, first of all, for explaining very clearly what the framework is about. I think the Mentimeter shows that the approach that was followed was really good. I suggest we go to the second part, where Davide Tonini from the GRC will explain how this framework can be applied and how it is applied and what the results were. Davide, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, Tom, and good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'll try to guide you through the application of the concrete application of the framework in the case studies we had within the project. Basically, what I wanna show during this presentation is the application of the framework that we applied specifically to food waste, to this stream, as this was regarded as important by the stakeholders. However, also we had a case on construction and demolition waste in Naples, on top of the food waste cases elsewhere. Amsterdam was the pilot case for REPAiR that was followed up by the different cities. What is our goal and scope in this exercise? Well, first of all, assessing a portfolio of eco-innovative solutions for the management of a specific waste flow. The scope was not only applying the framework, but also involving local authorities and stakeholders to design the scenarios and to collect the data. So there was a strong involvement of the local parties. We applied called consequential thinking in the study, which allows us to have a prospective view on the future impacts of the decision taken today or in the short term in the waste management system. Just for those that, just as a wrap up, Sue already beautifully explained the framework. Basically, just to summarize, we have 3 main steps in the concrete application of the framework, which are the life cycle modeling, then the assessment, and finally the ranking. The assessment consists of these 28 indicators that Sue already explained in the first presentation. What is the life cycle modeling? The life cycle modeling consists in modeling your foreground system. This is, for example, one of the tools we used. What I want to point out is that it is and Sue already did, this is a quantitative assessment. This is not a qualitative assessment, but a quantitative one. So we aim at getting numbers for each indicator of impact. This is just an illustration of how these impacts look like. For each area of protection, you basically have the classic bars, typical of LCA studies, where you can see the savings and the burdens induced by each scenario that you are analyzing. Once you are done with the quantification of the 28 indicators according to the framework, we finally have the ranking done through multi-criterion decision analysis. This allows to rank the scenarios that you assess from the best to the worst. For instance, if you have 6 scenarios, then you would have a ranking from 1 to 6 for each individual area of protection. As Sue stressed already in the first presentation, we keep 5 separate ranking. We are not compensating across different areas of protection. And this is to stick to what it is called in the literature a strong sustainability assessment, where strong refers to the fact that we do not compensate across areas of protection. This is a choice. Doesn't mean that this is better than not doing so. This is a choice. I'm going now to show the 2 specific case studies briefly, the case study of Amsterdam and the case study of Ghent. These are 2 choices among the different ones that we had. These are simply chosen by me for the purpose of having a brief presentation. However, you can find more information in the deliverables and in the scientific articles regarding the remaining case studies, and I will point to that later on. For the case study of Amsterdam, we had the scope was to assess the management of food waste in the city. We had as scenarios determined by the stakeholders, mainly home composting, centralized composting, anaerobic digestion, centralized, anaerobic digestion with advanced post-processing of the digestate to recover nitrogen and biochar, a centralized separation without door-to-door, which is called mechanical biological treatment, well-known technology, let's say, to separate streams without having a door-to-door collection or a source separation at the source. And finally, the reference, which was, in the case of Amsterdam, incineration with energy recovery. Had as scenario the mandatory separation of the food waste plus a collection with compressed natural gas-based vehicles. We had another scenario where we didn't assess a mandatory separation, but we kept the level that we have today, but using gas-based trucks and sending the collected food waste to an innovative treatment which produces animal feed from the waste through black soldier fly treatment. The number 3 was again imposing a further separation of the waste in the different parts of the cities where today it is not mandatory, plus collecting the food waste through vehicles based on gas, and finally sending the collected food waste to the production of animal feed, as in number 2. The reference for Ghent is a mix of anaerobic digestion, composting, and incineration for that portion of the food waste that is not currently source separated. These are the scenarios. Just to have a quick interaction with you, I would like to ask very quick questions, 2 very quick questions. The first one is, what do you think is the best scenario in the case of Amsterdam for the area of protection ecosystem health? Ecosystem health includes global warming, land use, water use, ecotoxicity, and eutrophication. So mainly the environmental categories. So what do you think is the outcome of the study for the case of Amsterdam? And the same for Ghent. What do you think is the outcome for the what is the environmentally most beneficial scenario in the case of Ghent? And here we have 3 scenarios plus the reference. The purpose of this exercise is to get a quick feeling from you on the on what you think would be the behavior of these technologies in the assessment. So Sue, maybe you can take over. I think we can allow a few minutes for this exercise, maybe 3-4 minutes, and after that I will try to go through the results by taking into account the results of the Mentimeter as well. Please, Sue.
Yeah, I do hope you can see my screen, and I see 7 people already participated in the link of the Mentimeter tool. Let's just wait. It's, I think, 1 question at a time. So first question related to the case of Amsterdam, but just maybe we can give them like 1 or 2 minutes. Already 10 people that participated. Up till now, most of them are voting for advanced anaerobic digestion as the best scenario in ecosystem health, but let's just wait for 1 more minute.
So there is a question from the chat where I don't. They have the link for the game.
No. Maybe now. Can they access now?
Now, yes. Now I think they will be able to see it.
Okay. So let's start already with the second question, then we can come back to the results. Eight people. Also 10 people already, maybe just 1 final minute. Okay. Okay, Davide, I think these are the results. So for the case of Ghent, most people, so 8 from the 11, so that's a very obvious ranking, I would say, scored the third possibility, which is mandatory separation, plus gas fuel trucks, plus the Black Soldier flight plans as the most environmental beneficial scenario. And then just going back to the case of Amsterdam, the results there were a bit divided, but on top, so the advanced anaerobic digestion, and then second, centralized anaerobic digestion. So that was the opinion of the people in the session. So back to you now to proceed.
Thank you, Sue, for your help here. Yes, I think this exercise was meant to have a feeling of what people think about the technologies prior to making a quantitative assessment. It's often the case where incineration is considered upfront a technology which is not sustainable, or that home composting is considered more sustainable than alternatives and so forth. And I think the idea of this framework, and the idea of the frameworks in general, is to put a quantitative to put a number on top of the discussion. So let's see what the result was for the case of can you see? Sorry, Sue, can you see my screen? Some problems now.
No, not anymore. Oh yeah,
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes. So the results for Amsterdam, I'm showing directly the table of the ranking. Here, the different scenarios that you saw in the slide before are listed now with a number, and the number represents the ranking. So if we have one that is the best under that area of protection, if you have the number 6, that would be the worst scenario under that protection. For instance, in the case of Amsterdam, this is somehow in agreement with what people think was overall decentralized anaerobic digestion. However, this was better in most but not all the areas of protection, particularly the area of protection in the area of protection prosperity, so economic cost basically of the scenario. In this area of protection, the incineration, the current management, still performs best. So it has the lowest cost overall, followed by home composting and the other technologies. So the case of Amsterdam somehow reflects what people think, but this doesn't apply. We have to keep in mind that in some of the area of protections assessed, there was a trade-off, let's say. If we have to give a recommendation for the case of Amsterdam, then we would say that the centralized anaerobic digestion followed by a post-treatment of the digestate would be the recommended pathway. However, not in terms of cost. In terms of cost, we would have a trade-off compared to the current situation. For the case of Ghent, we could see that actually the scenario number 2, which only implies compressed natural gas-based vehicles and Black Soldier flight treatment, that actually scores better than the number 3 that was instead considered as the best by the recent survey on the Mentimeter. And this is because of the trade-off we could see in different impacts categories. However, the number 3 still performs well, but it has a lower performance than this one. Here we also have a trade-off on the area of protection natural resources. Here again, likewise for Amsterdam, the current the status quo based on a mix of anaerobic digestion, composting, and incineration performs better than the alternatives, and this is mainly due to the let's say to the energy recovery and the energy expenses that occur in the different scenarios. This scenario has a better overall balance in terms of energy, and therefore in terms of consumption of natural resources such as natural gas and other forms of energy. If we have to give a recommendation for the case of Ghent, then we would say that scenario 2 and /3 would perform better than the others. In this case, scenario 2 would be the recommended one, except for the area of protection natural resources, where we have a trade-off. In the area of where this scenario would perform actually worse than the reference. Apply the sustainability framework to the different to the remaining cities, and here we looked at anaerobic digestion, composting, prevention also for the case of Hamburg and Pech. You can find more information on this in the deliverable D4.7 which is available in the REPAiR website, and in the future there will be a scientific article that we are preparing for the journal Waste Management. The take-home message from, I would say, from the entire sustainability assessment work package, we could see, I didn't show it, while I didn't show it in my presentation, we could see that prevention and redistribution, wherever applied, were the measures that performed best overall. Prevention, we could see it applied in terms of sensibilization events and with rewarding systems. This was these were say specific scenarios to the city of Hamburg, and you can find more information on this in the deliverable D4.7, as I mentioned earlier. In terms of collection, we could see that separate collection of food waste or organic waste doesn't bring additional benefits per se. However, it is a mandatory separation nowadays, also with the new framework directive, and therefore we must consider it. Let's say in our scenarios, when considering mandatory separation, centralized anaerobic digestion, centralized separation through MBT, first. Attractiveness, because it's not door to door, and further we could see that it has higher cost, higher impurities and emissions compared to the alternatives. We could also see that underground containers compared to a strict door to door separation are not favorable because of the walking distances and the impurities that come along with this kind of separation. We could also see that compressed natural gas vehicles are preferable to diesel ones. In terms of valorization, so final treatment of the collected food waste or organic waste, we could see that home composting has the lowest economic cost most of the times. However, we could see that home and centralized composting, along with anaerobic digestion, are not overall better than incineration. Anaerobic digestion becomes better in the moment we recover the nutrients with very specific post-treatments, and this could be the recovery of the phosphorus, the recovery of the nitrogen, the recovery of the carbon in form of biochar. However, still cost for anaerobic digestion for this kind of pathway seem to be higher than incineration, and the revenues actually comparable. This is because energy recovery at incineration is important, sometimes comparable or even higher than anaerobic digestion, and the nutrients content of the food waste is limited. Therefore, revenues from post-processing are also limited. We could also see that production of animal feed from food waste is a promising alternative in the specific case of Ghent, this was done through the black soldier flies treatment, and that showed excellent performance. For the case of Ghent, this was not again shown in my presentation, but we're going to present it in a specific scientific article. They also looked into bioplastic production from food waste, and the preliminary assessment showed, unfortunately, that this technology is still immature in terms of yields and process optimization, and still performs worse compared to the status quo. Thank you for your attention, and I open the floor for discussion and questions. Maybe Sue. Maybe Sue or Bob, you want to add something to this, or shall we?
Yes, Davide, thanks for your presentation. I see that there are 2 questions in the chat box, so maybe allow me to raise them out loud. There's one of Bob. If you look at Amsterdam case and you look specifically at the area of protection, human well-being, home composting scores best. Did you have the opportunity to zoom into this a bit more?
Yes, we looked into that. That's because there are different indicators under area of protection, human well-being, where actually home composting looks better than the other technologies. This could be, for instance, urban space consumption, which is limited in the case of home composting, and other few indicators which I don't remember. So overall, in that area of protection, yes, home composting looks better than the other. However, in all the remaining indicators, I think except for prosperity, home composting performs worse than the others. So that's why we maybe didn't highlight so much the performance of home composting.
Hey, Davide,
I think in 3
yes. to dwell on that a little bit, because it seemed quite a remarkable result, that it scored number 1, and the reference case scored a 6. And if you look at all the other areas of protection in the Amsterdam case, none of them scored as high as human well-being. So I'm also wondering, and this maybe links to a question of Sietse that came after me, how is human well-being defined? Is there something you could say about like mental well-being? Is that something that you looked at all, or could that be something that should be integrated?
Yeah, I think so. I think, Bob, your question goes back to I think at this point, rather than on the result per se, is of course a consequence of the decisions
Sure.
we had upstream. So I think this links back to the choice of the indicators under area protection with human well-being. We didn't look into mental well-being, for instance, that could be added. We had a specific set of indicators there, and for instance, one of them was urban space consumption, just to make an example.
Yeah.
Of course, the consumption of land, urban land, through a home composting pathway is minimal, is 0, because you compost it at home wherever you can. Therefore, there it would score best. There were other, for instance, the accessibility that there would be maximum, because you have it at home and the walking distance is 0. Is considered to be 0. So and these were 2 indicators just 2 examples of indicators under the area protection human well-being. Therefore, there the home composting initiative or pathway would score excellent compared to the alternatives. Including other indicators may change the picture, or may make it even more, may strengthen the importance of home composting. Let's say in my presentation I stressed rather the environmental and prosperity impact categories, because these ones are generally the ones that well, we are maybe more interested in, but I think you're right in that also the social part, the human well-being should be maybe further zoomed into.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, David. I think this is something that might come back in the next part of this session. Let's see.
I think there is another question from Sitze. Hope I pronounced it well. How was human well-being defined? Yeah, I think this goes back to what we just said. So it was defined based on the priority of the stakeholders. We had a list of indicators and they scored them, and then only those that, as Sue explained earlier, only those that were scoring more than a certain threshold were retained, and they were then classified under the specific areas protection, depending on where they should go. Hope this clarifies. Otherwise, there is a very good paper from the group on that. Laurie is asking if we had the possibility to communicate the results to the stakeholders. Yes, we did in different. We did it in different user board and conferences, meetings, events related to the project. So yes, we did. How did they react? Yeah, this was I think a mixed reaction. In some cases, I remember a very important discussion we had in one of the events, where from the ranking, we actually had to go back all the way to the indicators, to the raw results, to be able to explain to them. So the initial communication, let's say, was easy, but then they were so interested in the reason why the scores were like that we had anyway to move backwards to the original LCA results, let's say. And I think that was a very useful exercise for both parties, both the scientists, let's say, and the stakeholders. But yes, we found it useful to convey the message in a short manner, and then eventually to go back to larger explanations if needed.
Yeah, maybe Davide, I want to jump in here as well. We also had, for example, a workshop with the policymakers of the city of Ghent, where we explained the case study of Ghent and the sustainability results in detail. And well, there was a lot of discussion and interaction, so that's nice. And then after the workshop, we got some email exchanges and telephone calls about the fact that they really saw an opportunity to proceed with the insect breeding treatment for organic waste. So I think that's a very nice achievement also from the project and the results that we generate, that they really aim at the policy level to do something with it. And that's nice. Huh? So they are aiming to develop a new project and go a little bit deeper in that insect breeding, and then see how they can take it up in legislation at some point in time. So we see definitely that there is an effort to use the results that we generated. Okay.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, very important. Please interrupt me anytime you wanna add something to. I'm trying to get to reply to the question, and then you just jump in and further complement. I think there is a comment very interesting from Henry on the fact that we are including cost, but yeah, those costs are based on a linear economic model, and so we may be biased because yeah, we are modeling current costs based on the current systems, and it should be yeah, it suggests that we should present the assessment maybe, or think without the cost, and focus on human well-being and environmental outcomes. Yeah, I think this is a very important point. Yeah, the cost and the modeling of the prices is based on the current economy. This is a limitation, I think. You're right of the current assessments, because prices and costs are based on what we know today. And externalities, yeah, were not included in our prosperity. So we only included capex, opex, revenues, and traditional costs, let's say, conventional market costs. So this is a point you should consider when looking at our results. And yeah, Laurie, I think Sue, I don't know if you want to complement further on the question from Laurie. again on whether stakeholders found useful our way of presenting the results with rankings, or whether it is more appropriate to have the traditional LCA results.
Yeah, well,
how was your experience?
Yeah, I do can comment on that, because we provided also the detailed results at the midpoint level, so showing all these smaller graphs as you did, Davide, in the very beginning. So it's really a mess, basically, if you want to provide results for 28 indicators and impact categories, and then to draw some conclusions. That's really not useful. So they were very happy that we could provide it in a more aggregated way, and that we could rank the scenarios, and per area of protection, then they could easily see how the scenarios performed. So I think from also that perspective, we got good feedback, but of course, we are always open to learn and to see how we can improve things. So if anyone has a better idea on even make this aggregation more understandable, that's always welcome. But that at this point in time and during the project, we found that was the best way to really really provide the information in a simplified way. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I remember, just to complement maybe, so there was an important discussion during one of our events where I think it was together with Evelyn, where they were not very convinced by the results of Amsterdam on the natural resource category, and I think we had a very nice discussion there, because in the end it turned out, so from the ranking we went back digging into the results. And then we figured out that the category, the resource indicator that we have now, that was the best at the time we could choose, is an indicator that has some limitations, as you maybe can complement. So some of the, let's say, resources are not properly integrated in that indicator. So there might be also, of course, we are aware that all these indicators can evolve and can be perfection, let's say, improved in the future. So some of the results should also be taken carefully, because they depend on the indicators that we use. This is just to say that sometimes the discussion leads into the details, even though you show only you start with the rankings, let's say.
Okay, this is here. I'm just asking Tom or Sue, how are we doing for time with regards to the third part of this session?
That's okay. We still have 7 minutes, Bob.
Okay, perfect. Sorry.
6. I think there's still time for one question or maybe 2 questions before we go to you, Bob.
Yes, Tom, there is a further comment, I would say, similar to what commented before by Henry, again on the fact that we are considering cost, and this comment actually, let's say, supports the fact of considering cost in the assessment, because most of the business models today are based on minimization of costs. And this is basically what our indicator, the prosperity area, should reflect, I would say.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions still remaining, I suggest we move to the third part of this session, which will be moderated by Bob, who works at the Delft University, and where we look at not only, of course, applying the framework, but how do we move from decision support to the policy making itself. Bob, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Well, the floor is mine very briefly, and then I'll give the floor to Laurie Amelin, and both of them were already briefly introduced, and they will no doubt introduce themselves a little bit more. After that, we have the two presentations first, so they take about 5 minutes, more or less, to give the presentations, and then we will have a panelist session where we can fire questions at them. I prefer to do that at the same time, so have both Evelien and Laurie there for questions, because there will be some interlinks as well. Maybe we should just proceed like this, that people that have questions coming from the presentations, just put them in the chat, and we will deal with them then after the two presentations. So if no one objects to that, then we'll proceed. We start with Laurie Amelin, and I think she will mainly address the Cambioscope project, but that will become evident right now. I will share my screen and show Laurie's presentation. Laurie, you just tell me when I have to the next slide, okay?
Sure, I say next, yeah.
Yeah. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, Laurie, go ahead.
Thanks, Bob. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laurie Hamelin, and today I will tell you how can the REPAiR project outcomes make our planet great again. Next. Next. Yes. So, and why this funny title? That's because I am a laureate of the Make Our Planet Great Again initiative that was launched by the French president in 2017, where he invited researchers from all over the world to come to France and do a research project in relation with climate change, one way or another. So in this framework, I have the privilege to lead the Cambioscope project. It's a 5-year project where the overall aim is to figure out how to get rid of fossil-based carbon to supply products and services that are supplied today by fossil carbon in France, and how to do that in a cost and efficient way. So there are basically 4 ways we can do that. One is by using carbon from the biomass, with preference carbon from residual biomass. Second, we could use carbon from the atmosphere that we can capture from the atmosphere. Third, we could do that without using any carbon at all by using a maximum of carbon-free electricity to supply goods and services that electricity can supply, like heat or transport. And finally, we could strive to recycle or recirculate this now scarce carbon as much as possible within our supply chain. So in the Cambioscope project, we do several things. So one thing that we do is that we look at what kind of residual biomass we have, how much we have and where we have it, but more importantly, what we already do with it today and what is the environmental impact of that. So whatever use we want to do with it should be better than this current status. Then we look at a variety of, in this research objective 2, of conversion pathway, a variety of use, of bioeconomy use we can make with the carbon from this biomass. And we look at it in synergy with the other 3 options for carbon supply I was telling you about. We look at it in a prospective way. We also look at interaction with soil organic carbon and marginal land. I won't say more for now and go to the next slide. These are very preliminary results. And again, I won't go too much through it, but this shows you the quantification we've made and how resources are used today. That's just biophysical potential, and that's just petajoule. And what I wanted to highlight here is that in a country with a high agricultural output like France, what is really important is agricultural streams. So crop residues, in this case, straw mostly, and manure. And then we have other resources that are rather minor, and that includes the household biowaste and agri-industrial biowaste, which was the focus in the REPAiR project. So what I just wanted to say is that in the larger picture, this stream appears to be rather minor when looked at in petajoule, but of course, it doesn't mean that we should look how to manage it. Huh? So next slide. In let's say, associated project that we did with colleagues from Aarhus University, we tried to look, if we only look at bio-waste, how should we prioritize its use for sustainable bioeconomy strategies? And to do that exercise, we found useful to distinguish between what we call edible and inedible food waste, and also avoidable and unavoidable, or partly avoidable, and link it with the concept of surplus food, food waste, and food losses. I go to the next slide to keep within my 5 minutes and come back to the REPAiR project and link with David just presented us as take-home messages. And now I look at it with my bioeconomy strategy lenses, because that's my interest, to get this carbon for my bioeconomy strategy. And what I get out of it is that whatever edible and avoidable waste that we have, we should first prevent it. So therefore, we should not count on it as a carbon supply for our bioeconomy strategies. In terms of policy, and now I have to say that I am an environmental scientist focusing or looking at how to get there, what we want to, but I look at how to get there in terms of environmental technology, not in terms of socioeconomic policy. That's less my area of expertise. However, I could say that policies in this direction would discourage investment into any conversion pathway using edible, avoidable organic waste as input feedstock. So once we invest in technologies, they are there for maybe 40 years, or that's their lifetime. There is a payback time of 10, 15 years, and therefore they need to be fed and they need a feedstock. So there is a risk for a so-called rebound effect here. So if prevention cannot be achieved, this edible, avoidable waste should and must be used for or recirculated back to the food chain for humans. So that is what Davide was saying. So policy in this direction would encourage these reuse options and discourage preventable organic waste to be generated. But then whatever you can't prevent, so this non-edible or unavoidable organic waste, whether because it's inherently unedible, like pits, or whether because of bad management, like this salmon I forgot in my fridge last week, could and should be used for the bioeconomy. We should not deprive ourselves from that resource. And then we could see from Davide that separate collection seems to be better than centralized separation, and he explained why. Use in feed should be favored directly or indirectly through insects to the extent possible. That's good for me because we are looking at that in the Cambioscope project. Anaerobic digestion, providing effective carbon use and nutrient recovery, has interest. And composting might seem controversial, but appears to be out of sustainability, but it's cheap. And material too, under current technological status, not cheap, but out of sustainability or environmental performance, let's say. So policy in this direction would care not to charge per weight of separately collected waste, because people are creative and would make it disappear some other way when it's time to save money. Then incentivize use of organic waste to feed, and especially research and legal barriers in this area. Discourage, based on the results, home and centralized composting. And I forgot to write it down, but also encourage market for carbon farming, so for putting carbon back into soils from the digestates, for instance, or biochar, and market, let's say, efficient market for organic nutrients. So this was my attempt to make it in 5 minutes to stir up discussions. Thanks a lot. And I'm here for questions afterwards.
Thanks a lot, Laurie. Very interesting. I'm just checking, because I can't have the chat box open as well, if there's any urgent questions at this moment. Otherwise, I have one question for you before we go to Evelien. And there's a question from Sietse. That is, how is the discussion related? What is that, Sietse? Prionen discussion related to collection of mixed organic waste in BSF or insects? Can you see that as well, Laurie?
Yeah. How is the prior discussion related to the collection of mixed organic waste in BSF or insects. How is the prior discussion related to the collection of mixed organic? In our pilot in Amsterdam, we could not use the mixed organic waste and was a huge obstruction for the success of this project. Did regulation change around this? I don't know. I don't know. I'm not aware. I think some people of the REPAiR project would answer that better than me. And
okay, let's take this to after the presentation of Evelien. Maybe Evelien knows something about that as well. I imagine she does. The one question I had, Laurie, was you in the project, in the Cambioscope project, you look at systemic change, right, from a bioeconomy point of view.
System exchange.
Yeah. So you really look at how do we overhaul the current system and while breaking it down in the best options for the mid and
yeah, that's correct. That's correct. And
strategy
with 2050,
with regards to the available. That's correct, right? So yeah, okay. So there is no in that respect there's no bias towards a certain technology. Or...
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay. Okay, good. Just needed to have that clarified.
No rigid. Not at all.
There we go. Okay, Evelien, I'm giving you the floor, so I'm going to share your presentation. And you do the same as Laurie, just let me know when I go to the next slide, okay?
Very briefly then, because I had the opportunity to also in this morning plenary session to share with you all our journey towards circular cities. So a couple of slides are the same, and I will focus on the food value chain. Next slide, please. Because this is still our overall goal, to be 100% circular and climate neutral at the latest by 2050. And that means already within a 10 years time, we have to reduce the use of primarily resources by 50%. And that's an enormous challenge. And therefore we also look at the food value chain. Next slide, please. And here you see the three value chains we're focusing on, and these three value chains on food, consumer goods, and built environment were based both on economic as well as ecological indicators. So when we look at these three value chains, we are, from a governmental perspective, in a position to change it from linear to circular. We have a lot of policy instruments. We are a big buyer. So we can influence these value chains, and then I will focus in the next couple of slides on food, the food value chain. This is the topic of this session. As I explained also this morning, when you look at the total value chain, we first have to look at the first part of the value chain, where we can have the greatest impact. And looking at the food value chain, then it's about short food chains who can provide a robust, sustainable food system. And we've translated that into three action perspectives. We will look at food production, and we will make sure in the coming years that it will have a place in the city. So it's part of our daily urban life. And of course, procurement is a very powerful instrument, also referring to food. So it's about purchasing regionally produced food. So strengthen and shorten the food supply chain, and we can influence that. And what we can also do is accommodate a network of all those different organizations who are in the right place, in the right position to make a change and to combine their initiatives to make a very a robust system. Therefore, we need all those parties on board. Next slide, please. And then we look at the middle part of the value chain, where we use and consume the food. And therefore, it's really important that we make sure that we have healthy and sustainable food for the people of Amsterdam. That means also a shift from an animal-based diet to a plant-based diet, and that is a major transition in the food chain. So therefore, it's important that we can help the citizens of Amsterdam to change their eating habits, thereby providing alternatives that are also affordable. And that we are in a position to help all those people to reduce the food waste and make sure that there are not spillovers during the eating food in restaurants or at home or in retail. And that we look, because in our city we have so many initiatives, and we have to embrace and will embrace all those initiatives that are going to help us to prevent food waste, sometimes on the level of a street or a city district, or even on the regional level. Next slide, please. And I think that's also more or less my last slide. And then looking at the end phase of the end stage of this value chain, where we unfortunately still are producing waste, then it is really important that we look at high quality processing of organic waste streams. And when we translate that into 4 action perspectives, and these action perspectives are all related to, say, the portfolio of policy instruments we have as a city, then networking and working together to ensure the best approach for each city district. That means that for every city district, we will dive deep into the local context and see what is there the best solution. And we all know that it's mandatory now to have a separate collection of the organic waste. And we all know in Amsterdam we don't have that. There are pilots. So in the coming years, we will make sure that by 2030, around 75% of our organic waste streams will be collected separately. But if you look at a specific place in the city, and you look at, for instance, green zones, then you don't want to pull that out of the city, but see if you can use it within the city district itself. So very, say, context-specific solutions. And we do have to set the right example as a city, because we have a lot of food going around in our own canteens. Not at this moment in time during the pandemic, but hopefully one day in time we will return to our offices and to our canteens. Communication campaigns and using social media is really important to make people aware of the importance of separate collection and make it as easy as possible. And that we create room, that we create space and generate opportunities for reusing waste streams. For example, when we look at the Port of Amsterdam, there are a lot of very interesting and inspiring initiatives already going on. And by this separate collection, we can also make sure that we have organic waste with a high quality, so that we can use it as, say, a fiber for building materials, or as building blocks, bio building blocks for greening the chemical sector. Very briefly, and I will end with my last slide, and you recognize it from this morning, because it all ends up to a thriving, regenerative and inclusive city while respecting the planetary boundaries. So it's always about a combination of staying within the planetary boundaries, strengthening social foundation, and within this context, we can thrive as a city. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Evelien. I'm going to unshare. Evelien, to start with the final slide that you had, the thriving city for all, and also within the planetary boundaries that we know of the donut economy that you addressed this morning. That means that there is a quantitative side to it, right? We have to know when our planetary boundaries are under threat.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And is that something that is Amsterdam is already on top of? Do you have a clear grasp of that?
We're far from reaching our goal yet. But I think what is important that we have now this first framework, this monitoring framework, also with thanks to REPAiR and the data that came out of REPAiR. When we look at the input, throughput and output indicators of all those different material streams, including food and food waste, and combining them with the broader welfare indicators, the social foundation. And secondly, by presenting this city portrait, because I think it's important that we not only look at the impact of measures on the local level, but that we also have to take into account what the impact is on the global level, just looking at the whole production and consumption value chain. And that's the first set, so we've shared it, but we're at the beginning of grasping the quantitative details because we need so many data. So that's also the reason that we look into, can we have and develop innovative data partnerships with other organizations who are owners of this data. And citizens are also owners, of course, of data.
Yeah, and if you look at the REPAiR results, the sustainability assessment results as presented by Sue and Davide, to what extent are they helping you in this endeavor?
They are helping very much because we've made now the decision to start this movement towards separate collection of organic waste. When we look at the end phase of the value chain, and we also still have to decide what are then the best techniques, looking at all those different indicators to help us with that and to really produce products at the highest say value. And therefore, when we look at, say, the prosperity indicator and the discussion around this is a very linear approach because it's based on the present economy, I think we also have to take into account what would be the future value of those resources when you look at it from a circular perspective. And if you look at the value of, say, biocomponents for greening the chemical industry. And if we take that into account, maybe that changes the priority ranking of different techniques. And what's also stated and very important is that for sure, first we have to prevent and look at the first part of the value chain. There, our impact will be the biggest and the greatest. So we have to change the way we produce our food. We have to look for a robust system close by home, closer to our city than we do at present. And therefore also this, when we look at the total value chain, this kind of indicators could be very helpful as well.
Okay, thanks a lot. I want to take two of the things that you said to Laurie, and after that I will go to a couple of the questions in the chat box. First, the prevention part. Laurie also mentioned that, and that in relation to the different markets that you could imagine, if you talk about future value. And that was the second part, I think, Evelien, you mentioned, like biocomponents. And we come here in the field more of biochemistry, like how do we valorize these biocomponents that are in our current residual streams. Laurie, what is your take to this? Could you say something about the tensions between these different strategies, so to say, like the prevention and the different ways of reusing? What are the results that came from your project that you can already share that provide some insights in this regard?
I'm afraid not much. We're still ongoing. And we are still more in the technological pathway. No, I'm afraid not much yet. We're just starting with the food and feed, let's say, cluster of the Cambioscope project.
Okay, and if you listen to what Evelien is saying, is there some general reflection from your side that you would like to share with us with regards to the vision of the municipality of Amsterdam for the future?
Not yet, Bob, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Not yet, not yet. Okay, then I'll phrase it differently. If you look at the results as presented by Davide and Sue, was there anything that surprised you?
Well, you asked me earlier if there is any bias. And in that sense, maybe there is, because when I look at the results of Davide and Sue, I didn't have much of a surprise. For instance, this composting was not very surprising to me. Sue. Yeah, there is nothing really counterintuitive from the result of Davide and Sue, in my opinion.
No. And they mentioned the importance of micro impacts. And if you listen to Evelien's story, then there's also a huge emphasis on the local. Now, how does that relate to your scope within the Cambio Scope project? Is that something that you take into account?
That is something we take into account in the sense where the resource is produced. But all the aspects of, let's say, the more socio-economic aspects, it is something we strive to include, but that comes at the end of the project. So the strategy there is more to look at it in terms of environmentally and cost-efficient strategies, and then figure out, okay, how can we implement them, considering these issues in terms of logistics, for example, but also in terms of what could be better received locally in this or these areas.
Okay, so that means that certain results could be dismissed immediately if you kind of putting it against the measurement.
Yeah, yes and no. So we first start, and it may be wrong, but we first start by, let's say, looking at a broad range of perspective, then doing the environmental assessment, then looking, okay, what seems to perform best, and then use that, and but not just the best one. We take a range, and then we play with it, considering socioeconomic aspects, and then from that figure out, okay, what seems to be the most interesting for French bioeconomy strategies. This is the approach we decided.
Okay. Let's go to a few questions. We have a couple of minutes left. Davide has a question for you. Very clear question. You may have seen it in the chat box.
Yeah. Regarding the carbon. Yes, and one thing I wanted to stress there was that regarding carbon, if you remember the IPCC special report, this SRCCL, they looked at 40 different response options in link with land use. And one of the best one in terms of GHG mitigation was to put carbon back into soil. So there's a huge potential there. And I think that is not to be forgotten. So how was the question? Would you know specific agricultural areas? Yes, and this is something we are doing. So we're doing it in France now. We consider, so there are literature saying that we can consider a carbon vulnerable soil as being one with 30 tons of carbon per hectare and less. So we are mapping those. Now we do it for France. And in the framework of another European project called NIGEM, we do it for the whole world. We identify this area, and we also try to figure out how we can improve the carbon stock in these, mostly through a strategy we call biopump, but returning these organic residues is also, of course, part of what we can do.
Yeah. Okay, clear. Davide had another question, and that one was for Evelien. Evelien, I don't know if you have read it already.
Yeah, it's about the legislative barriers, looking at the different solutions. And of course, there are many legislative barriers for the whole transition towards a circular economy, and also looking at the food chain. And on the other hand, our, say, very practical strategy is learning by doing. So we are starting, we will do it, we will prove in practice that it's possible. And what is helping us is that the national government also have a very integrated strategy and program on circular economy. And they have chosen five value chains, and food, biomass, and organic waste streams are one of them. So we're teaming up with the national team on this as well.
Yeah. Hey, and Evelien, building on that, there are legislative barriers. There's also cultural barriers, or maybe rather, say, path dependencies. And in the Amsterdam context, we know about the incinerator and the important role of the incinerator in energy provision. Is this a tension that weighs heavily on what you're doing with regards to the circular economy?
Of course, we are aware of the tension because we have a couple of programs related to a more circular and climate neutral city, and one of them is to get rid of natural gas and to be a gas-free city at 2040. And as you know, we're depending now on the production of heat from the waste and the waste incineration plant, because that is also within European context a resource that we can use for our district heating system. And our objective for the district heating system is to make it more sustainable and open system. So we're also looking in the coming years for other sources. But what you see here is the tension that we also are at the beginning of this major transition. So yes, on the one hand, we are striving for prevention and less waste. And on the other hand, we need at this moment in time the residual heat from the waste incineration plant to feed into our district heating system. But it doesn't affect the speed of changing our city into a circular city. We're walking these parallel ways and optimizing both of them in terms of how we can accelerating the transition to this circular and climate neutral city.
So that means that the municipality of Amsterdam is not going to invest in a new incinerator, for example.
I can't answer that question because that's a political one. But I don't
with
think
that
so,
being
no.
said, I will save Evelien. Your time's up. But it was a good question. Yeah. We have the same question again.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
You're also looking at the new incinerators, so we have the same issue.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Thank you, Evelien and Laurie, for your contribution, and also to the other ones for the very good questions. I will try to summarize. I will do an effort to summarize the last hour and a half. I would like to thank all moderators, of course. My first summary is on decision-making itself. It's clear that decision-making is complex. It's not always choosing about the economical aspect or the ecological aspect. It's complex, and I think that the benefit of the framework is that it tries to grasp that complexity and tries to make it simpler. I'm saying simpler, not simple, because I think that's also the benefit of the model, that it's still broad enough to cover everything. What I also see is that the model allows to go from guesstimating to more objective treating of scenarios, also from a gut feeling towards a more objective measurement. I think the Mentimeter showed very clearly that we, from our gut, have certain feelings, but that the model shows that it's not always the best option. Then to conclude on the model, for me, it seems like it's a solid model. I heard some remarks that it could still be optimized, but it's tested. It's tested on 2 real-life cases. And I think I would say it's ready for use, but read the manual. Read the manual and be critical what you're going to do with it. My second conclusion is one about food waste. Why am I taking it separately? Because on Friday, it's the World Food Day, unless some of you didn't know it yet. And it's also the day on food prevention, food loss prevention. I think it's a good moment for the last two speakers when they talked about food prevention. It is clear that everything regarding food waste, we all know what we have to do. We have to work on prevention, starting in the production itself. If we talk about short chain, for instance, we have to work on the collection and we have to work on the treatment. So we all know where we have to work on. What I see is that we are still doubting or choosing what are we going to do in each of these areas. I also heard from Amsterdam a very interesting point, and I read it 3 times. It said, we have impact as a city and as a citizen. So I would say, let us lead by example. And I also read, Evelyn, that you added, but we can't do it alone. That means that as a city, you can't do everything alone. But to finalize the second part of decision making, one is that it's complex, and 2, that it's all about guts. In Ghent, we say no guts, no glory. I think it's the case for policy making. You really have to choose to go forward. And I believe the model that we showed today is definitely something that can help in that. I would like to thank you with that for the session.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Thanks,
Thank
bye-bye.
you.